Hello.
Hello.
Hello, good evening.
Evening.
So last week we were looking at the 5th chapter in Ethics of the Fathers, and we got up to Mishnah 9. The two Mishnas we did last week, all these Mishnas begin with the numbers. So last week we did two Mishnas dealing with the number 10. We did the 10 miracles that took place in the Holy Temple and the 10 things that were created on Erev Shabbos, on the first Erev Shabbos at twilight. And this week, we're going to look at the number 7. Shiva Devarim, Mishnah 9, chapter 5, Mishnah 9. So it says like this. Shiva Devarim, B'goylam, V'shiva Devarim B'chacham. There are 7 qualities, 7 traits possessed by a goylam. What's a goylam? A goylam is an unrefined person, and 7 traits by a chacham, by a wise person. Chacham eino medaber b'pnei mi shehu gadol mimenu b'chachma u'b'minyan. A wise person doesn't speak before one who is greater than he is in wisdom or in years. Ve'eino nichnas l'toch divrei chaveiro, nor does he interrupt in his fellow's words. So that's 2 things. 3, ve'eino nipel lahashiv, he doesn't rush to respond. Shal ke'inyano meshiv kahalacha, he asks what is relevant to the subject matter and replies to the point. Ba'omer al rishon ba'al acharon acharon, and he speaks of first things first and of last things last. Ba'al ma shelo shama omer lo shamati, and about something that he hasn't heard, he says, I haven't heard. Omer omoide al ha'emes, and he acknowledges the truth. So these 7 things, v'chilufeihen b'goylam, and the opposite of these are possessed by the unrefined. So if we look at this Mishnah, it's very interesting because the Mishnah tells us there are 7 traits possessed by the unrefined and 7 by the wise. And then the Mishnah goes on to tell us, to list for us the traits of a wise person. And the reason for this is you would think that since the Mishnah tells us there are 7 traits possessed by the unrefined, that it would list those for us. But the primary goal of this Mishnah is to help us to become refined, to help us to become the chacham, the wise one. So therefore the Mishnah is not going to list for us those traits of the goylam, of the unrefined person, but rather is going to teach us how to be wise, how to be fine. And we can infer that the opposite kind of behavior is behavior to stay away from. If you look at the number 7, what comes to mind when you think of the number 7? Comes to mind 7 other days of the week, right? 7 is representing order and structure. Every object has 6 sides and a center. So the center is the point of connection that links all the sides and brings order to the object. And that's why the sages tell us that a wise person is characterized by 7 traits. So let's go through these traits and let's learn from these traits. So we start off and said, the wise person doesn't speak before one who is greater than he in wisdom or in years. So even if the person might be younger, but the person is wiser, then one should remain silent in front of them, because they have what to teach us. And if we are busy talking, then we will miss out on the wisdom to be had from listening to the wiser person. At the same time, a wise person also doesn't speak in front of someone who is older than them, even if they are not necessarily wiser, because with age comes wisdom. A person who has lived for a certain amount of years, each of those years brings with it the wisdom of experience, the wisdom of life. So therefore, what the person may lack in terms of chokhmah, in terms of wisdom per se, they gain in terms of life experience. We all know that if we take the time to listen to our elders, to listen to those who have lived life longer than we have, there is much wisdom to be gained from their experience. The Midrash Shmuel says, Eina Madaber, he doesn't speak before, means he doesn't rush to be the first one to offer an opinion. Rather, he waits until the wiser or older people have spoken, and then if there's something left for him to contribute, he will add. Also, the Midrash Shmuel says he will speak, or she will speak, if she has a question. Because if we have questions and we don't ask, then we cannot learn. And that's why in chapter 2 of Pirkei Avot it says, the bashful person, v'lo habaishan malamed, the bashful person won't learn. So that's another time where a person should feel that they will speak in order to ask a question, because when we ask questions, then we will come to answers. And you know, like when we sit around and we're learning together, sometimes we're shy to ask a question, but more often than not only when we ask the question will we have clarity, but those who are learning with us, more often than not, are so grateful that we asked the question, because either they didn't even realize there was a question, and because the question was asked, now they have gained more knowledge, or they didn't quite know how to put the question out there. So we should never be bashful to ask a question. He doesn't interrupt his fellow's words. He doesn't rush to answer. He asks what is relevant to the subject matter and replies to the point. Even though each of these is a point on its own, is a trait on its own, but usually one follows on from the other. So because he doesn't interrupt his fellow's words, that gives him an opportunity to listen and to grasp what his fellow is saying, and then to only ask a question that's relevant because he listened or she listened and there was clarity given. Now, the only question to ask is on something that hasn't already been answered. And likewise, because he doesn't rush to answer, he replies to the point. And be'ena nibhal lahashav, he doesn't rush to answer. This doesn't only refer to the student, it also refers to the teacher. The teacher is being taught that it's imperative that a teacher never embarrasses a student. And when a student answers in a rushed way, when a student asks a question, it makes the student feel that the question wasn't important and it can embarrass the student, and that will stop the student from asking further questions. And of course, we know that this is not a good thing at all, because if a student is left with questions, then they're left with doubt. There's another way at looking at this, but a nibhal lahashiv, he doesn't rush to answer, and that is that it's translated as the teacher is not anxious to answer. What does it mean is not anxious to answer? So the sages say that a goylem, someone who is uncultivated, may be afraid to answer. Why? Because they may be afraid that they will answer incorrectly. Their answer might not be correct, and they might make a mistake, and that causes them to try not to answer the question. A wise person never has to be afraid of not knowing something. We see even Rashi, many times in his commentary, Rashi will say, I don't know. And a teacher needs to always feel comfortable to explore a question that a student has, and not to feel bad or anxious that they may not know the answer to the question. And at the same time, if a question was answered and then later on the teacher finds out that their answer was incorrect, they shouldn't have to feel anxious to come back and say, you know what, I made a mistake. It wasn't as we learned last time. And of course, we realize and we understand why this is so important. It's so important because to feel comfortable to answer a question brings about more knowledge. And we're human beings, we can make mistakes, and if we're not too arrogant to portray ourselves as someone that never can make a mistake, so then more will be answered and more will be learned. The Mishnah continues. He speaks of first things first and last things last. So how do we understand? What does that mean? He speaks of first things first and last things last. So if somebody comes and asks the Chacham, asks the wise person 2 questions, which order should they answer the 2 questions? They should answer the first question first and the second question last, or the last question last. Or if several people come and ask a wise teacher many questions at once, the teacher shouldn't weigh up which question they think is the most important, but rather they should answer the questions in the order that they came. And again, it's very, very important so that the people who ask the questions feel comfortable to ask and don't feel put down, or that their question wasn't an important enough question. There's no such thing as a silly question. When we ask a question, we only can learn from receiving an answer. And that's why it's important when people ask us questions to answer in a way that the answer will be received well, that the person feels comfortable to receive the knowledge that is being imparted. It's also addressing a judge, that when several cases are brought to the judge, again, the judge shouldn't decide which case is more important and which case is less important. If one is concerning a larger sum of money and another a smaller sum of money, the judge shouldn't give greater significance to either of the cases, but rather they should be dealt with in the order in which they were received. And then it says, concerning that which he hasn't heard, he says, I haven't heard. That a person shouldn't pretend to know more than he actually does. So we see this as an example in the Torah. We see when Yaakov arrived in Haran, he asked the shepherds whether all was well with Laban. And what did they respond? They responded, all is well, and behold, his daughter is coming with the sheep. In other words, what they were saying is, well, so far as we can see, all is well with Laban, but if you want more information, you want more details of the story, talk to his daughters. Surely they can give you more information. And likewise, when a person is studying, a person is learning, they shouldn't be bashful to say they didn't understand something. And even if it were even a judge or a Talmud Chacham, a scholar who's being asked a question and doesn't quite comprehend the nature of the question or the details of the question, shouldn't be embarrassed to ask for clarification, to ask for clarity. And in this way, they will be able to answer the question properly. Umoide al ha'emes. The last or the seventh trait is Umoide al ha'emes. He acknowledges the truth. And the Rambam says, even if he can defend his position with logical arguments, he has to acknowledge the truth. The truth cannot be argued. A wise person is a person who can admit that they have made a mistake. We see this also in the Torah, the story with Yehuda and Tamar. After Yehuda had condemned Tamar to death because it had been shown that she had illicit relations with someone, she then told him privately that she was carrying his child. And he came out and acknowledged this publicly. And he said, she is more righteous than I am. So we see this even with a great tzaddik, Yehuda, who had so much to lose by admitting the truth, yet when he found out the truth, he acknowledged the truth. Now there's another way of looking at this. Modeh al ha'emes means to acknowledge the truth, but modeh also means to admit and to appreciate. You know, in the morning, every morning, the first thing that's supposed to come out of our mouths when we wake up in the morning is this word modeh. Modeh ani lefanecha. What does that mean? Modeh, I give thanks. To who? To Hashem, Melech Chai B'Kayim. I give thanks to Hashem. So another way of looking at the trait of a wise person is Modeh al ha'emes, that a wise person has the ability to show appreciation. When a person recognizes that everything they have comes from Hashem, then that person remains humble. And the opposite is true from a person who is arrogant. And therefore, a wise person appreciates everything that they have, and especially when it comes to the concept of knowledge, that David HaMelech, King David, taught us to be appreciative and to acknowledge when we learn from someone. As we see that King David called Achitophel, he only learned 2 things from him, and he called him his rabbi, his master, and his teacher. So a wise person shows great appreciation for everything that they have learned from their parents, from their teachers, and even if their wisdom ultimately surpasses that of their parents and their teachers or anybody that helped them in their journey for knowledge, they always are modeh, they always are grateful for that which they have received. When a person remembers that everything they have comes ultimately from Hashem, from God, that keeps a person humble. And in order for a person to give that thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to give that thanks to God, a person needs to be in the habit of showing gratitude to others. There's a story that's told that there was a poor person who lived in a rundown home at the edge of town. And he had a friend who lived in the city who owned a store. And his friend sold lottery tickets in the store. Once his friend said to him, "Why don't you play the lottery? Maybe your muzzle will change. You'll buy a lottery ticket, you'll win." So the pauper said, "If I had an extra coin, I'd buy myself a loaf of bread. I wouldn't put it on a lottery ticket." So the store owner said, "You know what? I'll buy you a lottery ticket. If you win, you'll pay me back." So in the middle of the night, the store owner checks the lottery, and lo and behold, he finds that his friend has won the lottery. So he went to the end of town in the middle of the night to go and tell his friend the news that he had won the lottery. So he first knocked on the door quietly, but his friend was in a deep sleep and he didn't hear anything. So he knocked louder and he knocked on the windows, and finally his friend wakes up and he opens the door and he says, "What do you want? Why do you come here in the middle of the night? Why are you waking me up?" So he said, "I want to tell you the good news that you won the lottery and now you're rich." Suddenly, when the pauper heard they'd won the lottery and he was rich, all of a sudden his whole demeanor changed. And he looks at his friend in arrogance and he yells at him and he says to him, "How dare you wake me up in the middle of the night? If someone else woke me up in the middle of the night, I would forgive them. But you, I'm not going to forgive, because you know that I am wealthy. And you know, so what business Do you have waking up a wealthy man in the middle of the night? And this is the nature of people. This is how people are. When something good happens to them, it causes them to become haughty and to think all of a sudden that they deserve the good that they are receiving. And they can forget that everything is a gift from Hashem. Everything comes from God. And that's why this Mishnah teaches a person, Modeh al ha'emes, to acknowledge the truth, means also to be grateful for the truth, which is that everything a person receives is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is a gift from God. And just as wealth is a gift from God, so too is wisdom a gift from God, and a person should never become haughty. And the best way to stay away from haughtiness is being grateful, remembering that without Hashem, without God, there is nothing. All these gifts are from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, are from Hashem. If we want to be able to have that gratitude to Hashem, to God, we need to maintain that gratitude to others. And it's important in our life that we remember to be grateful to those around us. And regardless of whether those around us play a big part in our life or a small part in our life, no matter what it is, anybody that puts any effort out on our behalf, we should be mindful of and grateful for, and that will keep us from becoming haughty. Now we're going to skip a couple of Mishnahs. And we're going to go to Mishnah Yud, the 10th Mishnah in the same perek, in the same chapter. Arba midas ba'adam. There are 4 types amongst people. 4 kinds of human beings. Ha'omer shali shalach v'shalach shalach shali am ha'aretz. The first type that's described is a person who says, shali shalach, mine is yours and yours is mine. That person is an ignoramus. Shali shali v'shalach shalach zo mida beinanis. The person who says mine is mine and yours is yours, that's a person of average characteristic. V'yeshomrim, however, some say that person who says what's mine is mine and what's yours is yours, zo midas Sodom. This is the characteristic of Sodom, which will explain what that means. If you remember, Sodom was a place of great wickedness. Shali, shalach, v'shalach, shalach. Mine is yours and yours is yours, chassid. That's a pious person, a benevolent person. Shalach, shali, v'shali, shali, rasha. One who says what's yours is mine and what's mine is mine, that is a wicked person. So 4 kinds of people we talk about over here. The first one says mine is yours and yours is mine. At first glance, you might think this is a good thing, that we share everything. But that such a person is ignorant, because they're ignorant of the fact that it is very important for a person's growth to recognize and to see individual success. So living in a communal kind of society, and a person doesn't recognize how much they have achieved, that is not a good thing. Even though in a way there is a good thing about it, there wouldn't be any jealousy, there wouldn't be hatred, because everybody would have what their needs are. And the truth is, if you look at Jewish history, you will see pockets of Jewish society that live this way, but the Mishnah is telling us this is not the way. Shali, v'shalach shalach, what's mine is mine, and what's yours is yours. This is one who only acts selfishly. That is average. Now, a person who, it says that a person who turns selfishness into a philosophy and encourages others to be selfish as well, that is midas Sodom. That's why you have two explanations over here. It says zo midah beinanis, that's a person of the average characteristic. But when it becomes a philosophy and the person encourages others not to be charitable, that becomes a terrible way of life. And we see that it's called midas Sodom, the characteristic of Sodom. Why is it called midas Sodom? The sages tell us why was Sodom destroyed was because in Sodom it was a crime to be charitable. Not only were people discouraged from being hospitable and from giving to others, but actually it was a crime to behave in that way. There's a very famous story told in the Midrash that happened in Sodom, that there was a young girl and she was caught being hospitable, and they punished her. How did they punish her? They took her and they took off her clothes, they put her on the roof, they smothered her with honey, and she was stung to death. This was the wickedness of Sodom, that they didn't just not encourage kindness, but it was actually outlawed. And we always grew up knowing this. When we heard the word Sodom, we understood the great wickedness. And this is where the term sodomy comes from. So that is not a good way to be. What about yours is mine and mine is mine? So that is a chassid. Yours is mine. Sorry, mine is yours, and yours is mine. That is a chassid. Did I miss one? Shali v'shalach shalach, so midah beinanis. No, we're good. That is a chassid. So what does that mean? That means that the person is charitable, but not for the sake of getting back. Not that the person says, you know what, I'm going to give to you, but I'm giving to you, but don't forget that when I need something, you should give to me. And the way a person should give should be above and beyond. The Talmud, the Gemara, to demonstrate the idea of this concept of shali shaloch v'shaloch shaloch, tells the following stories. There were the employees of Rabbi Bar Bachana once broke a barrel of his wine while working for him. So he took their cloaks as payment for the damage. They took their case to Rav. They said, we need our cloaks. They're our protection. And a Rabbah was instructed to return the cloaks. When Rabbah said, is this the law? Rav cited the verse. And what was the verse he cited? So that you shall go in the path of the good. If you want to go in the path of the good, this is the way you need to behave. The employees then said that they'd worked all day and yet were not paid and therefore had nothing to eat. Rav instructed Rabbah to pay them their wages. So even though they had damaged his property and owed him for the worth of the property, Rabbah said he should pay them the wages. So again, Rabbah asked, is this the law? And Rav cited the verse, and the path of the righteous you shall keep. So in other words, Rav was asking of Rabbah to go beyond the letter of the law and care for his employees selflessly as an act of piety. There's a deeper way of looking at this. Mine alludes to the secular aspects of life, while yours alludes to the religious life of Torah and mitzvahs, which is yours, referring to Hashem. The Chassid says, mine is yours, meaning the secular aspects of my life are yours. I engage in them for your sake, and yours is yours. I engage in Torah and mitzvahs not for my sake, but to serve you. So that's the meaning. Shali, shaloch, v'shaloch, shaloch, that a person has in their relationship with Hashem, everything they do is for the sake of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for the sake of Hashem. And of course, the last category is shaloch shali, v'shali shali. I want everything. And that is a rasha. That is a wicked person. Mishnah Yud Aleph. Arba midas b'deas. There are 4 types among temperaments. Noach lechos v'noach lerotzos. Easily angered and easily appeased. Yotza hefseda b'schoro. His gain outweighs his loss. Kosher lechos v'kosher lerotzos. Slow to anger and slow to be appeased. Yotza schoro b'hefsedo. His loss outweighs his gain. Kosher lechos v'noach lerotzos chosid. Slow to anger and easily appeased is a chassid. Nach lechos, the kosher lerotzos, rasha. Easily angered and slow to appease, that is a wicked person. So let's start with the first kind of person. That's a person who's easily angered and easily appeased. His gain outweighs his loss. Such a person, the first kind of person described over here, is not so stressful to be around, because even though the person becomes easily angered, those around that person knows that's not going to last long, and they will easily be able to be appeased. Whereas the person who is slow to anger but slow to be appeased, that is much more destructive. Because even though that person doesn't get angry as much, but when they do get angry, you better run away. You better not be around for a long time. And that's not a good thing. So a person who is slow to anger, that's a person who is a deliberate person, yet forgives quickly, which forgiving quickly is an impetuous act, is obviously defying their nature. That means that it's not easy for them. If on the one hand, it takes them time to become angry, but yet they're willing to give up on their anger quicker, that means they're going against their nature. And that's why the Mishnah describes that behavior as a pious kind of behavior, because that person is working on their nature. And we all know, we hear in the world, Hashem gives us each a different kind of nature, and we are here to work on that nature and to refine that nature and to elevate it. Not that we will say, oh, that's my nature, that's who I am. But rather, the Mishnah is telling us that we should work on our nature. Why does a person become angry? So we saw that illustrated in the previous Mishnah when we told the story of the pauper who was angry for being woken up in the middle of the night. Why did he become angry? Because all of a sudden he became pompous, he became arrogant. And an arrogant person easily takes offense. So anger is really a midah that we need to work very hard to refine. Anger can lead to very, very destructive behaviors. It says actually that anger is akin to idolatry. A person who becomes angry is considered as if they had worshipped idols. Why? What's the connection between anger and idol worship? So idol worship is when a person acknowledges something other than God, that worships something other than God. When a person becomes angry, they're in denial that whatever took place, whatever happened, was from Hashem, was from God. When a person gets angry, it's because they feel that nobody had a right to treat them in whatever way it was. In other words, they didn't deserve to be treated in that way. But the person is forgetting something very, very important. And that is that whatever happens to us is from Hashem, is from God, and therefore not that it takes away from the perpetrator. That's between the perpetrator and Hashem. It doesn't make the behavior correct behavior. But when a person is the recipient, whether it's the recipient of goodness, of kindness, that is because of Hashem, that is because of God. And when the person is on the receiving end of something that is unpleasant, that is also from Hashem, that is also from God. And so anger is when the person is not acknowledging God in the picture. They're taking Hashem out of the picture, which is akin to idolatry. Idolatry is also when a person takes a Hashem out of the picture. Of course, we know that it's not easy to maintain a calm demeanor when we feel that we have been wronged, but the sages tell us that a person who remains silent in the face of insult or mistreatment is promised to receive great blessing from Hashem, great blessing from God, and God says you're in good company. What does that mean? That means that God is constantly being disrespected and disregarded, and more often than not, God swallows it. God says, I love you anyway. You're my people anyway. I'm going to give you the land of Eretz Yisrael anyway. Let's hope we see this promise filled very, very, very soon. So this midah, this character trait of being slow to anger and easy to be appeased is something that that we hopefully will have the koyach, the strength to work on, and to have this beautiful midah of not being arrogant, of being humble. Now we look at Mishnah Yud Beis, Mishnah 12, again with the number 4, Arba Midas B'Talmidim. There are 4 types amongst the students, Maheh Lishmoa or Maheh La'abed, quick to grasp and quick to forget. Yotza Schara Behefseda. His loss outweighs his gain. So he gets it quickly, but then he forgets it. He loses it. So his loss outweighs his gain. Kosher Lishmoa, V'kosher La'abed, slow to grasp and so slow to forget, his gain outweighs his loss. So he has to work much harder, but at the end of the day, he's better off than the first student. The first student gets it like this, is very sharp, grasps it quickly, but that student doesn't maintain the knowledge. The second student has to work much harder, but that student maintains the knowledge for a much longer period of time. So his gain outweighs his loss. Maheh Lishmoa, V'kosher La'abed. Then you have the student who is quick to grasp and slow to forget. Zeh chelek tov. This is a good portion. Kosher Lishmoa or Maheh La'abed, slow to grasp and quick to forget. Zeh chelek ra. This is a bad portion. And actually, the fact that this Mishnah follows on from the previous Mishnah where it talks about anger is because there's a direct correlation between anger and forgetfulness. One of the punishments for getting angry, I think we have it in this week's Parsha actually, with Moshe Rabbeinu, is that anger causes a person to forget their Torah knowledge. And that's why the previous Mishnah tells us to work on our anger management so that we won't forget the Torah that we learn. So the student who is quick to grasp and quick to forget, this student is encouraged to review his studies and not to be satisfied with his quick grasp of the subject matter. In other words, that student should remember, no pun intended, but that student should remember that even though they caught on quickly, but they have difficulty hanging on to the knowledge. And the only way to hang on to the knowledge is to review and review and review again. And if they will do that, they will remember. And certainly, I believe, as we our minds get filled up more and more with information, it gets harder for us to remember things. We shouldn't lose hope. We shouldn't give up and say, oh, well, I won't be able to remember, but we should work at it and we should review it over and over and over again, and that will help us to maintain the knowledge. Also, when it comes to learning Torah, it's not only about the bottom line, meaning the effort that we put in is also acknowledged. A, and B also brings about that the light of Hashem is brought into the world through that Torah knowledge. So nothing is in vain. What about the person who's slow to grasp and slow to forget? The Mishnah encourages this student who may feel disheartened, because at the end of the day, the hard work is going to pay off, because when they finally get the knowledge, it will stick with them. And sometimes that can be frustrating for a person, where they see that others are gaining the knowledge much faster than they are. They feel disheartened that they have to work harder. But the Mishnah said, you shouldn't feel disheartened, but rather you should recognize the advantage that you're going to put in this extra effort, but at the end of the day, you're going to maintain and retain that knowledge longer than those who grasped it very quickly. And what about the person who is quick to grasp and slow to forget? So the Mishnah says, Zeh chelek tov. This is a good portion. So the Rebbe explains that's important for that student to, like we said in the previous Mishnah, actually 2 Mishnahs before, that the person should be moda al ha'emes. The person should be grateful and recognize that it's not that they're so brilliant and wonderful and well, they are brilliant, but that brilliance is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It is a gift from God, and that person will be kept from becoming arrogant. And we said that when a person gets arrogant, that's what causes them to become angry, and ultimately they could lose their Torah knowledge. And the last person described here is Kosher Lishma Mahela Abed, that the person is slow to grasp and quick to forget. This is a bad portion. The sages explain, the Rebbe explains that although it's a bad portion, the person should never forget who gave him that portion. That the Eibishter, that God is the one who gave him that portion. And just as God gave him that portion, if he so desires and is willing to put the effort in, then Hashem will see his desire and will recognize his effort, and through this effort, he can transform his portion from a bad portion to a good portion. And ultimately, his reward will be even greater than the person who received a good portion from the get-go. So it's all really about the attitude that makes a great difference in a person's life. Everything we have comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything we have comes from God, and it's something that we should recognize at all times, that everything we have is from God. Everything that comes our way is from God. Everything that happens to us comes from God. And when we acknowledge that, that keeps us from becoming arrogant. It keeps us from becoming despondent. It keeps us from any bad midah, from any bad character traits, and it keeps us humble. And when we are humble, we make room for Hashem in our life. We also make room for others. We also make room for blessing, for bracha. And specifically at this time of the year that we find ourselves in the 3 weeks of mourning for the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And one of the main reasons given for the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash is hatred and lack of respect between one person and another. So the way to remedy that is to work on our midos, to work on our character traits, to work on becoming more humble and making more room for others and recognizing others' needs and not becoming full of ourselves. And the way to do this, the Mishnah tells us, is to be grateful, is to recognize all the blessings that we have, to count all our blessings. And this will keep us humble and help us to go in the path, in the way of the pious, the way of the just. I want to wish everybody a beautiful Shabbos. This Shabbos is Shabbos Mevarchen. It's the Shabbos where we bless the new month, the month of Av. That means that next Wednesday is already the beginning of the 9 days.